I'm Jim Williams, Director of the Deep Decarbonization Pathways Project. What is the Deep Decarbonization Pathways Project? It is a coalition of research teams from the 16 highest greenhouse gas emitting countries that are developing national blueprints for limiting global warming to 2 degrees C or less. And the focus of the DDPP, as it's called, is to look at the long-term transformational requirements that are going to be needed if we take a 2-degree limit seriously. And the approach that we take, we refer to as backcasting or back trajectory analysis, which means we start with the point that we want to get to, reducing emissions to a level that are consistent with under 2 degrees C, and then asking, how do we get there from here? So each of the 16 countries has produced a report based on their detailed technical studies of how this can be achieved between now and the middle of the century. The Paris Agreement, signed in December of 2015, has a provision, Article 4, paragraph 19, that says all parties should strive to formulate and communicate long-term low greenhouse gas emission development strategies. Now, why is it important to have long-term low greenhouse gas emission development strategies, or as we call them in the DDPP, deep decarbonization pathways? Well, there's several reasons. The first is that the equipment and infrastructure that is used in the energy system has typically very long lifetimes on both the supply side and the demand side of the energy system. So in other words, a building which uses energy, an electrical power plant, an industrial boiler, a heavy-duty vehicle, all of these things have lifetimes that are of the same order of magnitude as the time remaining between now and the middle of the century. If you're going to only purchase one power plant, it's going to be around for decades. You want to make that decision the correct decision. That's why you need to look at the consequences of things that are going to be happening down the road. And that's what deep decarbonization pathways and mid-century strategies are for. If you don't do that, then you can end up with emissions dead ends. What that means is you can invest in technologies and policies that lead you to a certain level of emission reduction, but then become dead ends from the standpoint of reaching the deep decarbonization levels that we need in order to get to 2 degrees C or less. You can have something called infrastructure lock-in by investing heavily in technologies that only have a little bit of emission reduction potential, but can't go all the way to 80, 90% that we need to in order to really protect the climate. Another thing that having long-term pathways does is it allows you to anticipate future decisions or forks in the road. An example from our work in California is that there will be a choice in low emission vehicles between electric vehicles and fuel cell vehicles. Why is it important to anticipate that choice? You might just say, for instance, that the market will make that choice. Consumers will decide whether they want to buy electric vehicles or want to buy fuel cell vehicles. But if you're an electric utility company, it has a very big implication. You need to anticipate, because it takes a long time to build your electric grid infrastructure, whether you're going to need the infrastructure for charging electric vehicles or you're going to need the infrastructure for producing hydrogen from electrolysis on the grid. Those are very different for the implications for electricity planning. A further value of looking in the long term is that you can fully understand the global market potential and potential future cost of clean technologies. So for an example, in a study that we did with all 16 country teams participating in the Deep Decarbonization Pathways project, we looked at the amount of investment required in decarbonized electricity generation, in decarbonized fuel production, and in alternative vehicles. And if you take the cost projections on a country by country go it alone basis, you end up with one set of numbers. If you instead say, we're all participating together in a large global market where there'll be very high volumes of sales and the potential for a great deal of technological learning because of large manufacturing scale. History has shown us that prices come way down. We've seen it recently in the case of solar PV that's dropped dramatically in the last few years because of scale. And so what we found is that the things that are most important as technologies for deep decarbonization are likely to be reduced by roughly half if we create large global markets. And by being able to project out to the middle of the century and see what's required, then we can pave the way for the kinds of cooperation that are necessary to do that.